Welcome to today's special episode of Screenshot, a podcast series brought to you by the Inspiration Forum. What you are about to hear is a keynote speech between the human animal and the animate Earth, given by David Abram last October during the Ji.hlava International Documentary Film Festival. David Abram is a cultural ecologist and philosopher, best known for his work bridging the philosophical tradition of phenomenology with environmental and ecological issues. In this speech, Abram talks about what usually stays unnoticed. Air as an organ of the earth, its sacredness. About climate as commonwealth of breath, as well as about the affinity between air and awareness. Is consciousness really the special possession of our species, or is it rather a property of the breathing biosphere in which we all participate, he asks.
Hello, everyone. So I am David, and I am a cultural ecologist, which kind of combines ecology and anthropology, and a philosopher. What some people call a geophilosopher, that is someone who is working out ways of thinking under the influence of the more than human earth. And as an ecologist, I am especially fascinated with what we could call the ecology of perception, or the ecology of sensory experience. That is the way the activity of our animal senses, of our skin, of our eyes, of our ears, functions to bind our individual nervous system into the encompassing ecosystem. But I am just as fascinated with what we could call the ecology of language. Because what we say has such a profound influence upon what we see, or what we hear, or even taste of the earth around us. There are so many ways of speaking that we have inherited from this goofy civilization into which we were born, ways of speaking that actually stifle and frustrate the spontaneous reciprocity between our animal senses and the animate earth. But I'm convinced that there are other ways of speaking, that can encourage that reciprocity, enhance it, that actually open further this instinctive rapport between the human body and the breathing terrain around us. One example of a way of speaking that I think can be very common, that we take for granted, we say that we live on Earth, that here on Earth this is happening or that is happening, or we were placed on Earth for this purpose or for that purpose. In the United States, where I come from, the most popular live radio program that deals with ecological matters is called Living on Earth. But I want to say, do we really live on the earth? With my students, I often take them outside and I point up at the clouds drifting overhead. Now we know that this earth is spinning on its axis very, very fast, like a whirling dervish. At the equator, it's spinning almost a couple thousand miles an hour. Here at this latitude, maybe closer to just 1,000 miles an hour. So which way is west here? Someone who knows. Point to the west, anyone? Sort of that way? That way, yeah. So it seems to me that we should see those clouds, since the earth is spinning toward the east so rapidly, we should see always the clouds whipping off toward the west. But usually they're not. They're just sort of lollygagging up there in the sky, or drifting a bit to the south or to the north. Why is that? I ask of my students, to which some perspicacious student replies, well, it's because the clouds are accompanying the earth as it turns, which of course is correct. That as we spin to the east, all those clouds are spinning with us because that's earth up there. That is, this ocean of atmosphere between the soil and those clouds and many, many miles above those clouds is fully a part of this earth. That is to say, we don't live on the earth, we live in the earth. We live submerged in this ocean of atmosphere. In fact, I've taken to spelling the name of our planet in English, Earth. I spell it E-A-I-R-T-H, Earth. I put an I in the middle of the word because I, at least in English, is the letter that we use to signify the self. I do this, I do that. And the I is just an upright slash. It's just a vertical line. It seems to me that that slash, we could take it as a pictograph of the spine of this animal who spent so much time on all fours for a long time, hanging out, but gradually beginning to balance on its hind legs and then back on all fours. But we got so used to balancing on our hind legs that we began to spend all our time standing up. It seems to me the eye is just a pictogram of the upright spine of this primate who stood up. So if you take the eye and place it in the middle of the name of our planet, Earth, you then spell it E-A-I-R-T-H, Earth, which says, the I, me, I am in the air, A-I-R. And the air is entirely a part of the earth. It's a piece of the earth, E-A-I-R-T-H. In fact, the air is an organ of this breathing planet. Well, and it sounds earth, it sounds vaguely Scottish, which is probably a good thing. It's a good thing because starting tomorrow morning in Scotland, in Glasgow, is COP26, is the meeting, the United Nations gathering focused on climate change. And so that is beginning just tomorrow morning. I thought it might be useful for us to reflect some on this mystery of the climate, but from a very different angle than you no doubt have heard before or thought about. That is, I want to talk to you about the commonwealth of breath, the climate as the commonwealth of breath. It seems to me that we don't usually notice this invisible stuff. We take it so much for granted. We don't speak of the air between you and I, between me and another person. We just speak of the empty space between us, or the space between you and a nearby tree. We don't say, there's lots of air between me and that tree. We say there's lots of space between me and the tree, because it's empty. For us, it's just empty space. It's a void. And so it's a perfect place, this void, to toss everything we want to avoid. All the toxic byproducts of our industries, all the noxious brew of chemicals exhaled from the stacks of our factories and power plants and refineries, and the stinging exhaust belching forth from our fossil-fueled vehicles, spewing from automobiles, yes, and trucks, but also airplanes and cruise ships and tugboats and giant tanker ships lugging thick tar sands crude oil to be processed in foreign ports. Even the most opaque and acrid smoke billowing out of the pipes, we think it dissipates and then it dissolves into the invisible air, and we think it's gone. Out of sight, out of mind. Out of sight, out of mind. Well, mind, or consciousness, or awareness, is this hopelessly amorphous and ephemeral phenomenon. something that's very difficult to pin down. Gobs of scientific papers and books have been published in recent years trying to account for the emergence of mind or awareness, or to explain how consciousness is constituted within the brain. Many of these works are weirdly at odds with each other because there exists no clear agreement as to just what this thing we call awareness actually is. What is consciousness? I mean, part of the difficulty stems from old habits, like our age-old assumption that mind is a uniquely human property, an utterly intangible substance that resides somewhere inside each of us. It's a problematic assumption. Given the easy obliviousness with which we humans shove other species over the brink of extinction and our ready capacity to wreak havoc upon ecosystems utterly essential for our own flourishing, it might be that a bit of humility is in order. We may not be quite as conscious as we have assumed. It seems to me that at this moment in the human story, some fresh conception, a fresh image of mind or consciousness is perhaps in order. Some image that has a kind of wisdom built right into it. So, I don't know if you've ever considered this, but our experience of awareness, this amorphous and ephemeral power we call consciousness or awareness, has a lot in common with our felt experience of the Earth's atmosphere. Consider the air, this light-filled and fluid element in which you and I are now immersed, with its agitations and its calms, its storms and its subsidences. Consider the unseen currents drifting between the soils and the clouds and circulating among us wherever we find ourselves, pouring in through the doors and eddying along these walls, streaming in at your nostrils now and circulating within you as I'm speaking. Like the quality of awareness, the fluid air constantly informs us, and yet it's very difficult to catch sight of it. We glimpse the air only indirectly, right? As it bends the branches of a birch tree or slants the rain, and then we see, there's wind blowing, or maybe it pulls a page out of our hands and sends it flapping down the street. We drink the air ceaselessly, alchemizing it within our flesh and replenishing it with every outbreath, and yet we seem unable to fully bring it to our attention. Itself invisible, the atmosphere is that through which we see everything else. Much like consciousness, which we cannot see and we cannot grasp it, is that through which we encounter all other phenomena. We are unable to step apart from consciousness in order to examine it objectively, because wherever we step, it's already there. Mind, in this sense, is very much like a medium in which we are bodily situated, and from which we simply can't extricate ourselves without ceasing to exist. Everything we know or sense of ourselves is conditioned by this atmosphere. We are intimately acquainted with its character, endlessly transformed by its influence upon us. Yeah, and yet we're unable to characterize this medium from outside. We are composed of this curious element, permeated by it, and so we cannot take any real distance from it. So to acknowledge this affinity between air and awareness is to allow this curious possibility that the awareness that stirs inside each of us is strangely continuous with the wider awareness that moves all around us, twisting the grasses on the ground and lofting the crows overhead. Every organism partakes of this awareness from its own unique angle or situation within it, each of us imbibing it through our nostrils or through the stomata in our leaves, altering its chemistry and quality within us before we breathe it back into the surrounding world. So, is consciousness really the special possession of our species? Or is it rather a property of the breathing biosphere, a quality in which we, along with the woodpeckers and the spreading weeds, all participate? I mean, perhaps the apparent interiority that we associate with mind has less to do with a separate consciousness located somewhere inside me and another consciousness located somewhere inside you, and more to do with the intuition that you and I are both situated within it, a recognition that we are carnally embedded in an awareness that is not, properly speaking, ours, but is rather the Earth's. Among the Inuit and Yupik peoples inhabiting the circumpolar Arctic, this enigma is called Sila. Among the Inuit peoples of the far north, Sila has a very mysterious meaning. There are variants in local dialects: Hila, Hla, Shla, Sla, Tla. All of these voice the same mystery, most commonly called Sila, the wind mind of the world, source of all breath. Sila is the elemental wonder of the air itself and of the winds that stir and sometimes surge within the air, of storm and mist and every other kind of weather, but also awareness, consciousness. That is Sila. Silarjuak, that which has no creator, constant flux and change, mind at large. Silatunik, wisdom, both from Sila, the intelligence of the air, the mind of the cycling seasons and the weather, the great indweller in the air. Sila is the source of all breath, of all life, of all awareness. Awareness, wind mind. In the early 1920s, an old Inuit Angakok, or shaman named Najajnek, spoke in conversation with the Danish explorer Knud Rasmussen. His words were translated by Rasmussen into Danish and then by others into English. Najajnek spoke of, quote, a power that we call Sila, that cannot be explained in simple words, a great spirit sustaining the world and the weather and all life on earth, a spirit so mighty that its speech to humankind is not through common words, but through storms and snow and rainfall and the fury of the sea, all the forces of nature that humans fear. But it also has another means of utterance through sunlight and calm seas, and through small children innocently at play, understanding nothing. Children hear a soft and gentle voice, almost like that of a woman. It comes to them in a mysterious way, but so gently that they are not afraid. They only hear that some danger is threatening. Now, when times are good, Sila has nothing to say to humankind, but withdraws into its endless nothingness, where it remains as long as people do not abuse life and act with respect toward the animals that are their food. No one has ever seen Sila. Its place is a mystery, at once intimately among us and unspeakably far away. Unquote. Well, so Rasmussen's written records and many more recent ethnographies make evident the importance for the Inuit people of another, more intimate power, the breath soul, or Inua, that indwells each living being, providing life and awareness to humans, animals, plants, trees. Our breath soul, however, is entirely a part of the wider mind of the wind, since Sila, the sensibility in the air, subsumes all individual Inua, or breath souls, within itself. This old circumpolar understanding, you find this all around the circumpolar north. It neatly unties, actually, the modern philosophical knot, commonly known as the mind-body problem, the puzzle of how a purely immaterial mind or consciousness interacts or is generated by a purely material body. Because for the Inuit, consciousness may be invisible and ineffable, but it is hardly immaterial. It is rather the sentience of the unseen, but nonetheless tangible material element in which we are bodily immersed and in which we participate with the whole of our breathing flesh. The sun-infused atmosphere is our common medium, a broad intelligence that we share with the other animals and the plants and the forested mountains, and yet each of us engages it with the particularities of our body. And since your body is different from mine in so many ways, so your experience of awareness must be different from mine. Your interface with the common medium of air is necessarily richly different from mine. The still more contrasting experience of a praying mantis, or a grasshopper, or a pileated woodpecker, or of a field of wild lupines, for that matter, are as curiously different from our experience as their bodies are different from ours. Each being's awareness is unique, of course. Yet this is not because an autonomous mind is held inside its particular body or brain. Rather, each being engages the common awareness from its own extraordinary angle through its particular senses, according to the capacities of its flesh. Well, I hope you follow that simple thought. It's not just common to the peoples of the far north, however. I do think it opens an interesting angle, previously unsuspected, upon this matter of climate change. But again, it's not just found in the far north. Let me give at least one other example. Near where I live in New Mexico, in the American Southwest, high desert, foothills. But just about 200 miles to the west of me live the Navajo people, or the Diné people, as they call themselves. The Diné are the largest Native American tribe in North America. And their most cosmological power, their most monotheistic kind of presence is something they call nilchi, which means the holy wind. And the holy wind is the whole body of the atmosphere when it's moving and when it's still, including the sky overhead, the air all around us and within us. Nilchi, holy wind, is what gives all beings life and breath and movement and awareness, sentience. It is what enables all things to communicate with one another. The mountain, the oak tree, the squirrel, all in communication through Nilchi, holy wind. So they also speak of the wind within one. The wind within one is a very common phrase among the Diné people, and the earliest anthropologists, who actually were missionaries, heard the Diné people speaking of the wind within one. They thought, this sounds like the personal spirit of our Christian belief. But they missed that the wind within one is entirely continuous with the wind all around one. Now, Nilchi, or holy wind, is holy, it's sacred. Why? Because you can't see it. Because it's utterly invisible. You only see it indirectly. Again, as it bends branches of trees, as it bends the grasses, as it lofts the clouds overhead. But you can't grasp it, and it's invisible. You can see it by the traces it leaves. It leaves these little spiraling patterns wherever the wind goes. So wherever you see a spiral in the world, you know that holy wind has been there. And so they say these spiraling patterns in our fingertips that we call our fingerprints, that's how we know that 10 little winds entered into our fingertips when we were born. And we have similar spiraling patterns in your toe tips. I don't know if you've noticed them, but you do. And that's how we know that there are 10 little winds that entered into our toes when we were born. And the winds in our toes hold us to the ground. And the winds in our fingers hold us to the sky. And that's why we don't fall down when we're walking. Say, the Diné elders. But there are also these spiraling patterns in the folds of our ears, these vaguely spiraling shapes in our ear folds. And that's how we know that there are two little winds hanging out, one inside each of your ears. Wind's children, they call them. And when you are thinking thoughts, when you hear this surge of words inside your head, the Navajo elders say, well, that's just wind's children talking to you from inside your ears. So when you're thinking thoughts, it's the winds talking to me inside my ears. But these little winds are the children of the winds of the four directions, who themselves are subsidiaries of the huge body of Nilchi, holy wind. So our thoughts, according to the Navajo, are being thunk not by us, but by the wind. And this notion of mind as wind can seem very strange to us. I mean, for the Navajo, they would say, yes, there is something interior about the mind. You are right. It is a kind of interior, but it's not because it's inside you. It's because you are inside it, because you are bodily inside this vast wind mind, along with the bodies of all the other animals and the plants and those floating clouds. We all live immersed in this mind, in this sentience. And this can sound really weird to us, having been grown up or educated within the schooling systems of this very goofy civilization, until we notice the evidences in our own word, like our word spirit, which comes from the same root as the word respiration. Or here we are at the Inspiration Forum. Inspire, respiration. The root, spiritus, the Latin word, originally meant a breath or a gust of wind. Or our word psyche, from which we get psychology, psychiatry, eco-psychology. Where does that word psyche come from? Well, it comes from this old Greek word, psyche. The verb, psychein, meant to breathe or to blow like the wind. And a psyche, or a psyche, was a gust of wind or a breath of air. Even the Latin word for the soul, anima, from which we get animal, an ensouled being, or unanimous, being of one mind or one soul. Where does that come from? Anima. Comes from an older Greek term, anemos, which meant wind. Even such a scientifically respectable term as atmosphere, which we hear a great deal of these days. Where does atmosphere come from? Well, it is cognate with the Sanskrit word atman, for soul, the word for the soul. But the old Indo-European root, atmos, meant the soul, which is the air which is the soul. In fact, if you take the words for mind or spirit or soul in any language today and you trace them back to their oral origins, you'll find at least one of those words that names the air as the very body of that mystery we call mind. So it seems to me that this notion of mind as wind is very, very old. And it's, in many ways, is the strongest contrast between indigenous oral tradition peoples and contemporary, literate, alphabetized civilization. Why would oral peoples have such a sacred relation to the air or the wind or the breath? Well, because when we speak of indigenous peoples, we're speaking of cultures that by and large were deeply oral, that is, cultures that lived without any highly formalized writing system. And so for a non-writing culture, human language is what I'm doing up here. It's speech, it's speaking. And speech, I don't know if you've noticed this, speaking is something we do only by inhaling some of this invisible stuff, and then we breathe it out. And as I breathe out, I shape the breath with my lips and my tongue and my teeth, and I send my words out on the out-breath into the world. Right? We don't speak on the in-breath because it doesn't sound good. We only speak as we're breathing out, right? So for oral peoples, language is nothing other than shaped breath. It is assumed to be the air that is carrying my words to your ears or your words to my ears. That is, the invisible atmosphere is the very medium of meaning. It is the medium of all communication, and it carries all the meaningfulness that we experience in our lives. It's the very place of the spirits. It's the very place where one's ancestors' voices linger after they've passed on, right here, around us. So this is the big, huge experiential difference between indigenous, traditionally oral cultures and modern literate society, is everything we associate, all that creativity we associate with mind and consciousness and think is inside our skull somewhere. Such that I have a little mind inside me and you have a little mind inside you, and then we get to argue about whether that squirrel has a little mind inside it. But for traditionally oral peoples, all of that creativity is not inside us. We are inside it. It's not ours. It's the land's. Everything is participant in that sentience, in that mind. But let me try to cash this out a little bit. What kind of a difference might this make if we were to begin to think of sentience or consciousness or mind in this way? Let me give you some examples. I mean, think about the weather. This thing we speak about all the time. How's the weather today? Oh, it's sunny. No, it's raining today. Darn. But what is weather? These weather phenomena, when they move across the land, the particular place where you live, wherever that is it not a kind of shift within the entire mind of the valley where you are? When a cloudy, overcast day comes, or when those clouds move aside and it's crisp and clear, does it not affect all of the people living there? But not just the people, the other animals as well, also the plants. Let me give a few examples of this. Here's one. Torpor, which is a kind of dullness. During the summer, one sometimes, well, especially near the coast in North America, you sometimes wake to a day that seems like any other, although as you go through the motions of getting dressed and preparing breakfast, you notice your thoughts are lagging behind, as though they have yet to fully separate themselves from the state of sleep. A slowness attends all your cogitations. The newspaper today seems written with less zip, reporting the same old thing with the same stale phrases. And when you put it aside, you wonder if a minute's rest on the couch might be in order before tackling the day's work. The immediate tasks to be accomplished are, after all, somewhat vague and unfocused. It's kind of difficult to even remember what they are. Only upon stepping outside and surveying the world from your stoop does the material cause of this mental lethargy become apparent, because the leafy trees, the electric wires, and the other houses are all bathed in a kind of humid atmosphere that renders their outlines all fuzzy and imprecise, while the mountains that usually rise from the far edge of town have dissolved or are wholly shrouded somehow in the moisture-thick air. There's no cloud to be seen in the washed-out sky, only that too big sun hovering in the east, sweating like a spent tennis ball mouthed by too many dogs. Its dull heat presses in from every direction. Lucidity. Then there are those rare days, not entirely unknown in every part of this planet, days that dawn with a clarity that muscles its way into every house and office, lending a crispness and cogency to almost every thought. One feels uncommonly good on such days, and other folks do as well. Deliberations move forward with unaccustomed ease. Ambiguities resolve themselves or render themselves more explicit, the choices more defined and clear-cut. There's a delicious radiance that seems to come from the things themselves, from even the tables and the plush rug underfoot. And when we step outside, we can taste it in the air and the way a few fluffed clouds rest, almost motionless, in the crystal lens of the sky. And how far our vision carries on such days. When we climb to the top of the street, we can see clear to the mountains that rise from the plain in the neighboring state. Long-term goals abruptly become evident. Possibilities way off in the future seem far more accessible, lending perspective to the present. Hence, planning goes a lot more smoothly, with a marked absence of the usual friction, no sweat. Although, to be sure, we are not always in synchrony with such felicitous weather, with a strangely clarified transparency that lifts the weight of the whole suburb on such unpredictable days, or that wraps the aspen branches outside our cabin with such a pellucid and form-fitting cloak of blue. Sometimes we're still carrying the strains and stresses of recent weeks, struggles that followed us into our dreams and now cling to our face and our feet, or perhaps we're still in the dank doldrums due to the wreck of a relationship we had trusted our heart to. These are the worst days for depression, when everyone else we meet moves so smoothly through the world. Even if we're off on our own, well away from the human hubbub, the despondence can be darker on such days, when it seems that the stones and the singing sky and the blades of grass are all tuned to another frequency. There's an insistent and eager harmoniousness to things, an ease that we sense on the periphery, the whole hillside itself humming with pleasure for the whole afternoon. And yet the mood cannot penetrate the thick pellicle of our pain. The mismatch of the world with our own traumatized state feels distressing, even terrifying, shoving us deeper into the pit. Stillness. Okay, the computer keys rise and fall beneath my fingers, letters arranging themselves on the screen as I list the matters I have to attend to in the next days. Drop off a clutch of letters at the post office, compose a decent lecture for the conference on Thursday, clean the stove and the oven. And since we are having guests, I'd better gather up this year's receipts from the various boxes and standalone piles where I've tossed them and maybe organize them in some respectable fashion. The guests are my parents. They're arriving Wednesday, tomorrow, to spend time with their 2 grandchildren. Tomorrow, how exactly do I expect to find time to craft a half-decent lecture for that conference? Oh, I'll have to just come up with some sort of outline and then just wing it. Meanwhile, my partner has been scowling at me all day because I forgot to fix the vacuum cleaner last week, as if I have any idea how to even fix or even take that gizmo apart. When I fixed it last year, it was sheer luck. The bulky part fell down the stairs while I was trying to pry it open, and then miraculously started working like new. So all of a sudden, she thought, I'm a mechanical wizard. Huh. Not that I don't enjoy the respect, but sooner or later she'll discover I'm a quack. The last person one should trust with any tool more complicated than a shoehorn. Anyway, I have to remember that the voice I reached at the power company said they'll indeed turn off the gas and electric if I don't get a check to them by Wednesday, tomorrow. Too late to send it by mail. Maybe I can swing by there on the way to Hannah's dental appointment. After the dentist, we'll have to head straight to the airport to pick up my folks. But why in Earth's name is she going to the dentist again? What kind of scam are these doctors running? If my daughter's teeth weren't perfectly fine, she couldn't bite her friend Finn so effectively. Even if she comes home, if she comes home again with one more coloring book from that waiting room with all those grinning animals and faces proclaiming how important it is to see the dentist every 6 months, I'm going to sue that dentist for corrupting minors. Why does he need so many visits anyway? Doesn't he have any friends? As the overwhelm hits me, I feel a shot of acid in my stomach and feel it register too as a fleeting wince on my face. Not good. This upcoming lecture has me on edge for some reason, maybe because it's in my hometown for once. And so various acquaintances are going to be there expecting something dazzling. Christ. As the overwhelm hits, I feel a shot of acid in my stomach. Ouch. Yet something catches my peripheral vision. And I turn toward the window and I feel my eyes widen in amazement. Snowflakes. A great crowd of snowflakes floating down, a deep thicket of slowly tumbling white. How long has this been happening? I stand and stare for a few moments and then pull on a sweater and step out the door into a landscape transformed as if by a spell. My steps make no sound. The white blanket already plush upon the ground and layered in tufts upon the juniper and pine branches, as flakes now drift down like loosened stars. 100 of them swerve into my face, melting cold against my skin as I walk slowly through a world utterly transfigured by this silent grace, cascading through every part of the space around me. The surge and press of the week's worries have somehow vanished. When I try to call those concerns back to mind, I simply cannot find them behind the teeming multitude of slowly falling flakes. Past and future have dissolved, and I am held in the white eternity of a moment so beautiful it melts all my thoughts. All weight has lifted. The innumerable downward trajectories have convinced my senses that I am floating, or rather that I'm rising slowly upward, and the ground itself rising beneath me. All of us just floating up as the snow is floating down. A sound, the flutter of a bird's wings, and a small explosion of snow from a branch the bird launched from. Then just silence, not silence as an absence of sound, but as a fullness, as the very sound 10,000 snowflakes make as they meet the ground. A thick silence, muffling the whole valley, and for all I know, the entire cosmos. I cannot imagine that any bird, any squirrel, any coyote, or rabbit is not similarly held in the visible trance of this slowly cascading silence. The clumps on the branches deepen. The snow falls through the night, the porch light illuminating a charmed space through which powder floats steadily down. I turn it off before heading to bed and then step outside to inhale the darkness. Now even the house and the truck asleep in the driveway have fallen under the spell. By morning, the snowfall has stopped. And yet the enchantment still holds. When I step outside and snap my boots into my skis, there is a soft stillness everywhere. I glide between the trees and onto the dirt road whose countless ruts have disappeared. Unbroken goodness spreads itself out in all directions. There is this hushed purity to the world and to awareness itself as I float across the snowy fields. The dentist will wait, and the power company will get its check when the roads are clear, whether today or tomorrow. Thursday's lecture is now forming itself easily as I glide over the white expanse. My body is writing its smooth script over these unbroken pages. Now and then, a high limb releases a too heavy mound of snow, and a spray of powder drifts down in sheets, glimmering, scintillating, and then vanishing into the now clarified air. I'll stop there enumerating these and just, I think, draw this to a close.
The talk you have just heard was given by David Abram to an audience of the Inspiration Forum during the 25th Ji.hlava International Documentary Film Festival. In the next special episode of Screenshot, you will hear the philosopher Judith Butler talk about freedom. One, which is a shared freedom to live a livable life, and the one that makes our lives unlivable, valuing only itself. You can listen to all Screenshot episodes at inspirationforum.cz/podcasty and in all the podcast apps. Get inspired with us for the future.